You already know what it is. This is CARROLL'S Cadence, baby. Happy Monday, beautiful people. We are 17 days out from week 1 of Florida football, and I'm as pumped for this show as I am for every single one of them. Thursday is exactly 2 weeks from kickoff. It's coming. And as a result, today, I know we've been very narrowed focus of Florida position groups and uh, quarterback battles and just little things that have been directly involved with the team so far this year. But I'm broadening the scope for the show today. I want to look at 3 games that could be crucial, that will be crucial for Florida's success or lack thereof it in 2023. I'll be the first to say I have several reservations for this Florida team, at least in what their ceiling looks like. I'm not completely pessimistic like some others, and as the season gets closer, I've honestly started to see myself shift expectations in a positive direction. But there are aspects of this group, of this team, that worry me. I'll share those thoughts in full when I give my year-long predictions in just about a week or so. But regardless, winning the games that I'm going to talk about today will be the catalyst to proving a lot of people wrong. Because we know Florida's expectations are here. Nationally, they're here. They are not in a position where people are betting on the Florida Gators. And so there's 3 games that could really take Florida from here and move them up. I'm not saying they're going to be a contender by any means, but they could achieve a 7-5, 8-4 record if they're able to win 2 out of these 3 games. So make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, join the family, baby. We're on the road to 500 subscribers. Let's get this thing going. Next milestone is 500. Then drop a question on this video about Florida football that you'd like to hear me answer in a future episode, probably later this week, not Wednesday, because we got another guest on Wednesday. Yeah, man, let me talk to you. Last time this show aired, I broke down some of Florida's injury concerns at this stage in fall camp relative to what Utah is facing at the quarterback situation, quarterback position. And most injuries or most issues I labeled were minor. And I said several expected to be back, at least before week 1, if not later in the same week. And on Sunday, I traveled to Gainesville for Sunday's practice session. And that was exactly the case. So I just wanted to give like a brief overview of what I saw in Sunday's practice session, because I'm not going to sit here and tell y'all that it was, something that I can take many takeaways from. If you've watched this show before, I'm not someone that's going to give you crazy observations from these practice sessions because of the limited amount of time we get to see. But one thing I could note in this practice session was that the secondary specifically has gotten a lot healthier. Jason Marshall Jr. and Jaden Hill returned to the lineup on Sunday. Jason Marshall Jr. dealing with a precautionary soft tissue issue. And then Jalen Hill was dealing with an illness. They're both back at full participation. And then you get a guy like sophomore Devin Moore back in the fold. Obviously, he's been dealing with an injury for quite some time, was limited in terms of he was working off to the side until this point. And now he's, taking another step toward full participation, still donning a black no contact jersey, but working within his position group and operating in the no contact drills portion of the practice. And then, Napier said he'll be back in a couple days, which to me means he'll be back this week, if that holds true. But that's crucial for him, especially with him battling with Jalen Kimber for that cornerback 2 spot opposite Jason Marshall. Florida's getting healthy, and I think, and at this position specifically, they're almost ready to go there, which is an astronomical dubski for Austin Armstrong as he begins to implement his game plan for week 1 in the coming days. But it didn't end in the secondary. You have Scooby Williams on a similar track to Devin Marshall, where he's still limited, but he's participating with his position group in those no contact drills. Lindell Hudson, who's been dealing with a concussion, returned to full capacity. Obviously, that's huge for Florida's offensive line, as he was before in a competition for that right tackle spot. Obviously, the pendulum has swung toward Damian George Jr. since his absence, but there's been several others that are now progressing toward the field, which is great for Florida, because just Friday, it seemed like it was the opposite. You had several guys trending toward the sideline, which is not ideal, like I mentioned in that episode. So if you haven't watched that after you get done watching this one, go check that episode out. That was episode 8 of Carroll's Cadence. This is episode number 9. Anyways, on Friday it was a concern. On Sunday it's much better. Welcome to college football, baby. The momentum is something that changes so quickly, and for Florida to have that pendulum swing back in their direction at this time is perfect for how they want to move forward. But one thing I saw other than injuries in this small viewing window was just the overall operational aspect of the process. Even in the routes on air portion, I kind of saw the offensive's character shine through this team, just in like their little the minute details, because there were a variety of motions, bunch formations, delayed releases, routes working to the short side of the field, executed by the skill position players throughout the period. So quarterbacks are having to rotate from tight ends to running backs to wide receivers throughout this portion, each in an individual drill, but you have them working in these ways that can directly translate to how Florida wants to operate its offense this upcoming season. And then you have Graham Mertz getting up to the line of scrimmage, yelling out cadences, kind of working and honing in on the important aspects of the game that at every stop. It's not just something that's going to happen in team period or something that's going to happen in scrimmages. It's something that's happening in the 15-minute viewing windows that we receive. So that's just another indicator that we're moving toward football season, and whew, you can tell it's about that time, and whoo, buddy, does that get me juiced, because of my job as a beat reporter for Florida, I may not be a Gators fan out of the spirit of objectivity and unbiased coverage, but man, that will not stop me from being a football fan. I can watch football all day long. I love football. Football is the best, and you see it from Florida that we are getting close to that 2023 season as everything in that operation starts to get tighter and move smoother. But it's time for me to get into the meat of today's episode with my breakdown of 3 games that could make or break Florida's 2023 season on a success level. And after watching this, of course, you can go in the comments and tell me why I'm wrong and why I chose the wrong contest. But my criteria for this breakdown was that it needed to be conference games that could legitimately be labeled as toss-ups. I know season opener against Utah is going to be crucial. Season close against FSU will hold massive weight. You'll have games against Georgia and LSU that were, they'll be highly anticipated, but there's a small chance for Florida to contend with those teams. And it's not necessarily a slight for UF, but those are college football playoff contenders, and Florida's just not there yet. So to exceed the expectations that have been laid out for Florida this season, which could potentially be equal or worse to what it's been in the past 2 seasons, at least that's how they're saying it on a national scale. My 3 games are Tennessee in week 3, Kentucky in week 5, and then South Carolina in week 7, in no particular order of importance. But those are the ones I look at that can determine the extent of Florida's win-loss success in 2023. And it starts with the Volunteers coming to town on September 16th. And historically, Florida's dominated this series in the 21st century. They are 17-5 in the last 22 contests. They held an 11-game winning streak from 2005 to 2015, and they've lost just 2 games in the last 18 years. However, last season, we kind of saw that this series might be becoming highly competitive again, with Josh Heupel bringing that high-octane offense to the Volunteers, and it looking like it's there to stay. And I know they've transitioned quarterbacks, and they've had turnover elsewhere. They've had a few guys at wide receiver move on, and Cedric Tillman and Jalen Hyatt. But a major reason why I chose this matchup is because it's going to test Florida's defense early in the season. It's going to test, okay, how improved can this defensive line specifically, but also, secondary, and really just the entire operation under Austin Armstrong improve from what it's been over recent years. And despite the quarterback change I mentioned from Hendon Hooker to the unproven Joe Milton, the scheme that Josh Heupel runs for the Vols is just chef's kiss. It's beautiful. The passing attack is tough to guard because they're looking to stretch the field. They're going to run their boundaries all the way up, vertical stem into, it'll just be a vertical passing game on the outside. And then they have a sneaky good rushing attack with Jabari Small leading the way. That'll present legitimate issues for opposing teams this year because you're going to be looking at, okay, how can we stop this passing game, especially with the arm that Joe Milton has? He can uncork it. And if he is any accurate at all, they are going to have a very explosive offense, rivaling the one they had last season. Because Milton is talented. It's just, can he put it together from a consistency standpoint? But then you have everyone eyeing in on that portion of the operation. And then Jabari Small's in the backfield who's a stud. Jabari Small is very good. He's a underrated back in the SEC. And you talk about an offense that can tailor it, that can be tailored to any guy that behind center. And it's not too complicated, and it's increasingly productive as they add more skill position players from the high school level, because guys are seeing this Volunteers offense and they're saying, oh, I can go be a part of that. I can go run, a 9 route every down and, have the opportunity to be Jalen Hyatt last year where he just racked up touchdowns, racked up yards because he was just every play, just getting up out of there, getting down the field, getting up out of there. He was gone every time. It don't matter. But it's just Florida's having to find a way to pull out a victory against the Vols team that will largely, it'll be largely up to the unit of Florida's defense, because Florida, the way they're built, can't get into a shootout. And the Volunteers want to get into a shootout. They want to run up that score and have the other team have to score with them. And Florida's built to control the clock, operate at a methodical pace. And if Tennessee's offense that likes to run a play every 18 seconds, Heupel brought it over from UCF. That was when UCF was at its peak, was operating at, they were being this high octane, fun, fast offense, high tempo. And if they can move the ball and find pay dirt via explosive plays, it could be a long day for Florida, as that defense, is unable to find a rhythm, and that offense is consistently having to be on the field and churn out these long drives to keep Tennessee off the field because they're scoring every time they get on it. So it's why I think this game is crucial. It'll be the most evident test for Florida's defense that Austin Armstrong and company will face this year. And I think it could set the tone for how the defensive unit performs as a whole in 2023, being that it is a week 3 contest inside the Swamp. And then 2 weeks later, Florida will go from playing Tennessee. They'll have another home game against Charlotte, ending a 3-game home stretch on the road to Kroger Field to take on Kentucky. And this is a team they've struggled against in recent years. But Kentucky, like Tennessee, for a long time was jotted down as a win for Florida. They were, for decades, they were, okay, we see this team on the schedule. All right, we beat, Kentucky's a dub. And for so long, it was right until 2018. Kentucky came into the Swamp, had a very solid performance, put down the Gators, and it's been a rocky road ever since. Florida's dropped 3 out of the last 5 contests over the last 5 years, including the last 2. And they look to even the series this year, but it's a raucous environment in Kroger Field. And they kind of get a midseason litmus test here, especially considering the way Florida wants to play, because I think each of these games that I point out will bring a different attribute to the table that will test Florida, or it will test a different attribute for Florida in 2023. And this one specifically is physicality. It's just the way Florida wants to operate. You look at, we're not exactly sure what we'll get from the personnel standpoint of Kentucky this year. Obviously, Devin Leary coming in from NC State, replacing Will Levis, Chris Rodriguez moving on. You have these different guys that are going to be parts of this team that we haven't really seen before. But let me tell you one thing. We for sure know how they're going to operate. We for sure know what they want to do, play in and play out. And that's bust the other team in the mouth. They're going to want to run the football down the other team's throat. It's the identity that they've clung to under Mark Stoops, and it's given the Gators fits. But now the Florida Gators want to do something similar. They want to run the football, control the line of scrimmage, and just force their will, impose their will on their opponents. There's not a lot of flash that comes with it, but it's a domineering approach. That's the way that Florida's looking to operate, especially offensively this upcoming season. And as a result, this is a game that features two teams that are very similar philosophically. Obviously, they're at different stages in their programs. You have, Kentucky that's looking to take a step forward this year. Mark Stoops said it at SEC Media Days. This is the year that he looks to take Kentucky to that next level instead of just being a 2 to 3 team, second to third team in the SEC East. He wants to find a way to work into that legitimate conversation of, all right, they're a contender in the SEC East. And while Florida just builds the program, year 2 of a rebuild that's probably going to take 3, if not 4 years, if it's can afforded to Billy Napier. But it's a game that could completely shift the narrative of Florida's ceiling in 2023 because of where Kentucky is at as a program, or they're expected to finish, and how they like to operate. Because if Florida beats Kentucky, it means that they out-Kentuckied Kentucky. And if they out-Kentucky Kentucky, that means that Florida is in a great spot to move forward and do it to the other teams that aren't built to play that way. And if they're not built to play that way, Florida gets a great opportunity week in and week out to continue establishing their identity. We saw last year the run game is Florida's identity. So if they can make it shake against Kentucky, who is built to stop the run, built to run the football on the opposite side of the ball, built to be methodical and domineering and just physical, that changes things for Florida. And I know it's going to be a difficult battle. I know it's going to be something that, we're going to sit back and look at as, this could be this is a test for Florida, even though for so many years it wasn't. Kentucky's not that team it used to be. Mark Stoops has made Kentucky a legitimate threat for teams, whether it's in the SEC East or just the SEC in general. You cannot sleep on Kentucky. You cannot take Kentucky lightly. And as a result, it is a massive contest for Florida this season. And while they have to take care of their rivals, Tennessee and Kentucky being 2 of their major rivals in the SEC East, they also have, they got to beat Vanderbilt again this year. Little things like that. There's another team that will be crucial after the Volunteers and Wildcats play against the Gators. And that's when they travel to Columbia in week 7 to take on a potential team that's on the rise in the SEC East. And I want to say one thing real quick. I know how each week I've said week 3, week 5, week 7, but I think the way that this Florida Gators schedule is made up right now, it's honestly favorable for the Gators because it starts with the big game against Utah and Salt Lake. Then it moves into a tune-up game against McNeese State in the Swamp. Then you're back into a legitimate competition against Tennessee where it's another hard-fought battle if they're able to pull that out. And then they're going week 4 against Charlotte, which obviously that's another tune-up game. But then they're going on the road to Kentucky. So they have, it's like there's this on-again, off-again schedule to start the season at least that gives Florida a great opportunity to ease themselves into these big contests and kind of find themselves in a position where, all right, we can work on things for the following week. Obviously, you have to take these teams seriously in between, but there's a lot of things that should help aid them to tuning up for the team in week 2, they'll be able to tune up for Tennessee. In week 4, they'll be able to tune up for Kentucky. And then after Kentucky, they go host Vanderbilt at home, and then they're moving on to South Carolina on October 14th. So there's, and I know Vanderbilt beat Florida last year. They're a long way from being anything but a bottom feeder in the SEC. Even though, side note, let me say, I'm a Clark Lee believer. That man will make Vanderbilt formidable in the next few years, but they're not there yet. And I know they're rising. They're at least showing signs of being able to rise, but I'm not going to sit here and act like they're legitimately, and like I said, they beat Florida last year, and it was a dominant game. Like, they dismantled Florida, and Florida just looked flat all game long. But it's hard to see that replicate for Florida this season, or for Vanderbilt this season, then replicate that, style, that game again, especially when it's in the swamp. And so now Florida, who dismantled the Gamecocks last year, after that Vanderbilt game, and it's kind of stuck out as that highlight of the SEC slate, gets the Gamecocks again, but on the road. And for the first time this in this regime, the game presents a test for Florida's fortitude against a team that they're not playing for revenge against. A lot of these teams, like Tennessee, they want them back for last year in Knoxville. Kentucky, they're looking to get them back because Kentucky's had their number recently. South Carolina, they beat them 38-6 last year. They held them to 0 points offensively. Their lone score came on special teams. They dismantled the South Carolina Gamecocks. So they're not playing for revenge. How can they step up when they're not necessarily the favorites, but they have an upper hand during the current era of this game, of this team? How can they play knowing that, okay, we beat this team last year? We have to step up and make, and try to make it double it. Try to make it 2 games in a row against South Carolina. And I think this game presents a lot of issues for Florida, and just you don't really know what you're going to get from South Carolina, but you do know they should be a difficult out for a lot of teams throughout the year, which would make them an even, a difficult out for Florida as they go into Columbia, because Spencer Rattler returns this year. They also get back Juice Wells, wide receiver, that is a stud. Juice Wells is so good at football. I like I said earlier, I love football. I love good football players. That man, Juice Wells, I picked him to be an all-SEC first-team wideout this year. And if Spencer Rattler does what he did toward the end of the season, when he just came alive strong, finally moved on from being the inconsistent quarterback that we saw early in the season for South Carolina, or just even at Oklahoma. He had an 18-12 touchdown to interception ratio the season ago, but 13-4 in the final 7 contests. If he can just find Juice Wells is going to explode. That's beside the point. But this upcoming season, we'll see Wells help Rattler just as much as we see Rattler help Wells. And I think that this offense should tick at a pretty high rate for South Carolina. This offense should be the highlight of the South Carolina attack. I think the biggest question mark for the Gamecocks will be their defense, giving the Gators offense and Graham Mertz the ability to take advantage, not just through the running game that they're going to try to establish early, but through the passing game. If Mertz can pick apart and make the plays necessary to operate in a form that gives them just the ability to take advantage of those opportunities, they'll be put in a good spot. And I know this is a team in a year 3 rebuild under Shane Beamer. They're going to be a tough opponent for every team to play, like I said. We saw the fire they had to finish the season last year, played spoiler for Tennessee's remaining college football hopes, just absolutely blowing out the Volunteers. They beat Clemson in the final week of the season. I don't know if you guys have watched much of the South Carolina Clemson series over the last decade. South Carolina has not won many of those games, but they did last year. They're not world beaters. They're not going to be this team that is going to be a contender. But let me tell you, this is a potential team on the rise in the SEC East, a team that can be that, in that top half of the SEC East moving forward, a consistent 8-4, 9-3 team. They can play spoiler for several contenders. And for Florida, it's just another challenge that can be the difference between a 6-7 type season and their first winning campaign since 2020. This is a game that will test Florida in so many facets, so many aspects of their operation, of how Billy Napier wants to to run this offense, run this defense, make this team, because South Carolina is ahead of schedule for where Florida wants to be in the next few years. Obviously, there's higher ceilings, higher aspirations beyond what South Carolina is or potentially can be, but because of where South Carolina is at this year, I think that will be another, kind of test, another crucial, critical game for Florida in 2023. And I almost picked Arkansas to be in this spot because, Arkansas coming to the swamp to face off against Florida after having played Georgia, after some big games that they're going to have to contend against, kind of getting back into the groove and finding a way to beat an Arkansas team that should be decent with KJ Jefferson returning this year. And I've been high on Arkansas the past few years, but they've disappointed each year. I mean, I'm interested to see how they perform with Jefferson and the backfield that they do have, and everyone that really steps into the fold there in Arkansas. But I excluded them simply because I felt that having three teams that you've already played once and will play again in 2023 that are a part of the SEC East, that are familiar opponents, and that you're going to get they're always a battle. They're always, I'm not saying Arkansas won't be a battle, but these are teams you're going to be playing consistently for years to come. And if you can't contend against those three, you can't find a way to pull out a victory against two of those three, then this season is not what Florida aspires for, which is being better than they were a year ago, building on the 6-7 season, the second straight 6-7 season that they had in 2022. So I think that while Arkansas will surely be another game that falls into the fold, along with, like I said earlier, I know I've gone through basically the entire schedule and just saying that Utah's going to, a big game, but it's not going to have much implication on how the rest of the year goes. FSU is going to be a big game, but again, at ACC opponent, not much indication on the rest of the year goes, considering where Florida's at right now. I'll tell you what, them SEC East games are always going to have a special impact on Florida's season. And Tennessee, Kentucky, and South Carolina this year are the biggest of impacts for Florida in 2023. Thank you for hanging out with me on this beautiful Monday. It's a great day to have a great day, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I was able to make the beginning of your week just that much smoother with Carroll's Cadence. I will be back with another episode on Wednesday with another guest. And on Friday, as I am every week, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays are the scheduled dates of shows. I hope everyone has a great rest of their week and look at each day as one day closer to the college football season. I'm Brandon Carroll. This is Carroll's Cadence, and I am out ya, baby.